This is honestly, and I'll preface this by without any flattery, unnecessary flattery, I should say. Working with you guys on Island Between Tides was actually one of my most favorite filmmaking
Yeah,
experiences. So I will
that's
caveat that. So
that's
that's a
nice
good
for
way
you to
to set
say.
the interview.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a very challenging shoot. Obviously, we probably still both carry some trauma from embarking on the idea to shoot a movie up in Prince Rupert to bring a bunch of other crazy filmmakers to the northern part of BC to help us try to achieve making a movie up there. It was not easy, as you know.
Yeah, so we'll take that as a double compliment, knowing what we all went through. That truly felt like we were, in the trenches together.
Yeah, going to war together sometimes brings people together and creates sort of this memory of an experience that, while traumatizing and you wouldn't plot this out and go the exact route again necessarily, but you have a lot of fun things to talk about later, and isn't that what filmmaking is all about?
I think there's 1,000 different things that we do differently, will do differently on the next one. And I think that's the whole point. You can only speak to your experiences of how they went when you're doing something, and you can think you have some bright ideas. And we thought we had a lot of really bright ideas, and not just like creative, but ultimately speaking to production and how to execute. And eventually you have to let go of your thoughts of control on that and let your collaborators help you with that. And that can be a very good thing, or it can be a not so good thing. So that's lots of lessons learned. And
Yeah.
that's the whole point to us, is like every single time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. And every single time you do it, you learn lessons so you don't make those mistakes.
Yeah.
Because you will make mistakes.
Well, it's such an important trust exercise too. And I think for Andy and I, we tend to go to great detail in our prep. And, we'll spend, just as a byproduct of making a movie, it takes so long to get the pieces together to make it, that, there's a lot of idle time when time is cheap, when it's just the two of us getting together and, working out what our shot lists are and devising things for, what are all the possible things that could go wrong on the day. Of course, we only were able to anticipate about a third of those. Two-thirds of those are surprises or more. But
Right.
to show up on the day and then at that point relinquish that, granular level of control where everything exists in such a perfect way in your head, and relinquish that to your collaborators. I found actually that may be easier than expected. But depends on, of course, the collaborator. Always does.
Andy, you seem to have a different opinion of that.
I think that we were very, very fortunate to have incredible collaborators on this movie and such. And I think what it gets interesting is, Austin saying relinquishing that control and having that trust in them. The trust had to be earned by anyone who you work with. And I think sometimes there's decisions that are made, especially, we wore a lot of hats on this movie, as you know, Anthony, and from writing to directing to producing. And Austin and I have always kind of joked, like, taking a producing credit on an independent film that you directed is a bit of a joke, because if you're directing an independent film, you're producing an independent film. How often are people directing $3 million indie that they did not have major components of financing it or getting it into production? You are a producer if you're directing. And the reason why we decided to take a producing credit on this film is that the genesis started with us. So not just writing a script, but putting together the financing, seeing that through, bringing in the producing partners that we had, and Matt Servey and Amber Ripley and Josh Husiliak, who was a huge part of us, again, putting this all together. So it's not so much that angle where I kind of chuckle at it, but it's decisions by your team, your crew, that you'll see get made. And that's your job as a director, is saying someone may make a decision and you look at it and say, well, that's the wrong decision. And sometimes you discover that because of how busy you are, or, you're shooting a movie in 23 days, you find out just before you're about to shoot. And that happened a bunch of times. And, fortunately for us, there's two of us. So Anthony, as you're aware, there was kind of this ability for us to divide and conquer. And we still didn't feel like we had enough time to approach the issues with the cast and the creative on the day, because we're dealing with so much of the other components. So sometimes, because we have such a great collaboration, Austin and I don't know how directors don't have a directing partner very often, because I just don't know how they have the time to deal with everything. And we're very fortunate that way, that we're able to kind of navigate the landscape together.
What I found very interesting about the whole process, and this started in prep. I mean, obviously, quite obviously, and well before prep, like years before prep. But the preparation of of sort of discussing all of the nuances, and from shot listing to just location planning and everything else, logistics and creative elements of planning ahead of time. Obviously, it has to stand the test of the day itself. So they always say in football, like you prep all week and then you spend the first 2 minutes of the game going to school and figuring out what the other team prepped. And that's kind of like what I felt this film was about, was like there was so much well thought out prep going into it, that when we hit all of those, of which unforeseen circumstances, like the just stuff that came up that you couldn't have written down and said, oh yeah, well, in case of this, let's do this. We were in a position to go, okay, let's pivot, let's move, let's do something, let's find another solution, even if it means moving to a whole new location that we don't have.
Yeah, I think without that prep, and Austin and I benefit from working together now for 13 years, that before something happens, I know how Austin will react. He'll know how I'll react. We'll know what our opinions are most of the time of what we should do. And so a lot of those decisions can be made independently, but without doing the work. And I mean, I think everyone looks at filmmaking a little bit differently. Like some people look at it like when you get on set, that's when the movie's made, like we're getting our hands on it. But that's really the execution of the work that you've done before. So yes, the writing is a big part of it, but all of the discussions of what you're going to do when you're going to execute are the most important discussions. And we had a lot of chances to discuss that with Anthony, with you, Anthony, and Danny, and our production
all
designer.
of our collaborators that way.
And for the most part, the key creatives on our movie were already up to speed by the time we got onto set. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily get that luxury.
Well, and that was us trying to be as transparent as possible with our intentions and as communicative as possible. We would share our storyboards every day as part of the package that would go out in the nightly emails about what's being shot the next day. All of our shot lists were public. We didn't always have the time to do all the shots on our shot list, but there was an understanding with all of our crew that they could also come to either of us with a question. We wouldn't almost ever need to consult the other person because we had done all of this prep for a good reason. We had the same intentions and the same idea and the same vision in mind for all of these scenes. And that was what we were working up through the writing process. Would have been different had we not written this film together and gone through as many drafts as we did. We often would still be doing the same scene together. We only had one camera team. There were a couple of moments where we split up, but I would be, maybe prepping the next scene or already blocking the next scene, and Andy would be finishing the current scene, and we'd get together after being separated for 45 minutes and talk about what we'd each done. And I always found those so delightful. Like those were some of my favorite sessions. What decisions got made, how did things turn out, and then there'd be sort of a sharing of things that I found very energizing. And that's a great thing about being in a collaboration like this.
We also, when we write, we don't want to write a novel when you're writing a script. In my opinion, the script's more of a blueprint than something that someone's going to sit down, light a candle and have a scotch and read your script. And I know a lot of writers look at that like this should be extremely readable. Austin's one of those. He writes all of the prose. And a lot of the time, if we have details that we want to be in the movie, but at script writing level, it doesn't make sense to include that on the page. And so that would inform, for the easiest term possible, our director's notes. And inside of our director's notes, it's an accompanying document that would go along with the script that we could share these thoughts with people, saying this may be a 1/8 of a page action line. But realistically, that 1/8 of a page has been talked about for hours upon hours, and we know exactly what we want to do with it. And you're not talking about prep as if it's this thing that only we do. Everyone preps on their film, but I think it comes down to the fact that we felt the most comfortable putting more work into the prep because we knew, and this comes from the experience that we have done. I've produced a handful of feature films before where things and locations fell apart and it doesn't go the way that you want. And sometimes when you're writing something saying like, how are we going to achieve what we want to do? What happens if we can't achieve what we want to do? And one of the things that we were working against on Island Between Tides, transparently, was our camera team was not able to shoot as quickly as we wanted to. And we were working with great professionals that worked on a different cadence than what we worked on. And what we had worked on was either micro low budget films like Lord Jones is Dead that we shot in South Africa, where it was really like as true micro low budget indie filmmaking as you get, to I produced a feature film directed by Jesse James Miller called Rabbit, which was the same thing. These group of 3 filmmakers, Ken, Jesse, and Bruce, who knew exactly what they wanted to do. And we were shooting, probably 35, 40 setups in a day because the actors were on the same page as the cinematographer. The director knew what he wanted. And so we were able to move at a cadence on those films very differently. Now you get into, it's kind of that more money, more problems kind of thing. People may have perceived our production as being less indie than it was. And that ultimately led to a detriment of how many setups. I remember in our pre-production meeting, Anthony, you're saying you guys have 24, 25 setups planned for this day. I think you're going to get 12. You were much more accurate in what we actually got. And that's coming from your experience of working with this style of crew. But for us, that's really frustrating when we're going like, okay, if we call cut, we don't need everyone to rush in and start chatting and pull out their phones. We can call cut and we can get going right away. And, that happened on our first and second day in a huge way where we shot, 2 of the biggest scenes in the movie on day 1 and day 2, just out of logistics of how the schedule was. And people were kind of looking at us wide-eyed saying like, why is this so frantic? Well, we have 5 minutes before lunch to get 2 more takes of the scene, and the scene runs 6 minutes. So now we're in grace on the very first day, which is not a situation we want to be in, but the end goal is not to eat lunch. The end goal is to get our scene. And I think the disconnect between servicing a film production, if you're working on a show compared to directing it, you can't. You're not talking the same language. Our goal was to get those scenes. The goal of the grip on set is to get his lunch because he's hungry. And so trying to get everyone to buy in. And by the time you finish filming, everyone's got the same goal in mind. Yeah. We're speaking the same language, but those challenges come up. And if you don't know what you want to do, you're in real trouble. And, when you have a producer hat on at the same time, you're thinking, well, we got this huge loan for our tax credits. We got this private equity that we have to do. We have to deliver this movie at the best that we can. And you're thinking of that all while trying to execute on your prep. So
and manage personalities.
And it's a difficult thing to do.
Isn't that such a huge part of the job that nobody really talks about too much, which is like the technical part of directing is already hard enough, right? Making the movie and telling the story in this beautiful way and figuring out your plan, that's so hard to begin with. But the management element of it is just a whole other level of it, right? And it gets in the way constantly. And you have to be able to be a good manager as a director as well.
And some directors actually make that harder too. There's so many different things that can weigh on that too. But just thinking of, yes, how impossible and how miraculous it is that anything gets made ever. And how, it requires all of your powers of empathy, compassion, understanding, patience, being able to meet other people on their level. And that's the nature of being in a high pressure, intense environment, making movies with others who don't see the world the same way as you, or don't see their job the same way as you. And what's to say one is better than the other,
Well, it's a team sport, right? Like in hockey, you're dealing with 20 personalities, right, on the ice, and or in a game situation. And there's a fourth liner and a first liner, and everybody's got what their role is. And sometimes as a director, you let your team, do what they do best at the pace they need to do it. And sometimes you have to sit there and go, look, we need more from you on your side, or we need a little bit more juice from the AD, for example, or something like that. Like we need you to push the pace a little bit more, because even though, yes, this is the pace, we need you to push the pace higher, because we need this to happen on our end in a more effective way. And I'm not throwing myself under the bus. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of like the role of the director is to know which levers to pull and when to pull them, and with the idea that, look, the objective here is to make a really good movie and to make the best movie we can with the resources we have. But that doesn't mean resting back on the resources that you are being told you've been given. It means pushing those to the boundary as much as you can.
I think the analogy that you brought in before of sports goes hand in hand with filmmaking. And I look at, I have a sports background, and I look at being a director as being the head coach, and the producer being the general manager, and your lead actor being the captain of the team. Every one of those components, it all starts with assembling your team and curating your collaborators, and which is, in my opinion, the most important part of filmmaking beyond the creative. Because you can have the best creative, but if you don't have the right collaborators or the people that are on the same page, it's not going to work out for you at all. Unless you have an endless budget and you're fine with burning money, it's never going to work out. And I think what we've realized, we've always had a no assholes rule. We want to work with people that we like. At Cryptic screening last night, how many familiar faces did we get to see that worked on that movie, that worked on our movie, that worked on Amber's previous movie, that worked on one of our previous ones? The best people keep getting brought forward. And Linklater talked about it in a documentary, which I loved. It is this idea of atmosphere. And so when you were filmmaking with 35 millimeter film, when the film's rolling, everyone's kind of focusing. It's like, the puck has been dropped and now it's our turn to go score a goal. And going to digital, there is this kind of newfound ability to not be as careful and not be as precious as the time.
Yeah, looseness.
Just because there's no film being running doesn't mean that anything has changed. And he talks about building that atmosphere of focus. And obviously someone like James Cameron talks about it a lot, where, if you're on his working set with a cell phone, he'll nail gun it to a wall. As much as I'd love to do that, I don't think that's the atmosphere as a head coach, is, ruling with an iron fist. But I think, it's our job to motivate everyone to be on the same page with the end goal in sight. And if everyone's working together that way, then we have less of a thing to worry about, or we don't have to consider every single potential thing that could go wrong. We know that we have our AD that's going to be putting out fires. We know that our production designer is getting ahead of something. We know costumes are going to be working. We know that continuity is good. So then we can kind of release that from the back of our minds and focus on what's going to be going on the camera. But it comes down to bringing the people in that are cool with building that atmosphere. The more structured and the more disciplined that your atmosphere is on set, the better product will be. So yes, we want to check our Instagrams. We want to communicate with the wife back home. We want to be connecting with everyone while we're working. But if we can get the mindset to say, for the next 12 and a half hours or however long that we're working, that this is the single most important thing in our lives, we're going to come up with gold.
Yeah.
Now, you're not going to be able to get everyone to agree with that. Usually the actors are on board with that pretty quickly, because if they don't do their best job, they're going to be seen. They're going to be visible. Yeah. The first AC isn't on camera. So if their mind is somewhere else and they buzz a shot, or they're not quite paying attention and blocking to get the exact distance for a rack focus, well, when the movie comes out, we're probably going to pick the coverage that they're sharp in, and may not be the best take. So they don't really wear any of that. Yeah. So the actors are the first ones to set that tone. And
the heads of department too, that accountability from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final thought on that was really that if you're able to build that atmosphere and have everyone on the same page, you're now working together. And it's easier thing said than done.
And if it's not the most important thing while you're there making it, then why are you even there? And that's the case with a shoot like this, where we were all in Prince Rupert. No one, there were a few locals who we were lucky enough to be able to find and train and work with, which was just amazing. But almost everyone on the crew was from elsewhere, and it was a camp shoot. We were all there for the specific purpose of making this film. For the month and a half we were all there. That sort of, I guess, looseness again with purpose. It took a little while, definitely those first few days, before we'd found a way to really gel and mesh. And it was such a delight to see everyone buy in and recognize what we were there, and the tone that we were setting as directors, the commitment that we were bringing to it, and leading by example there. I think we made it pretty clear we expected that from the people we were working with too.